TYT's new reporter, Jordan Chariton, interviewed some Trump supporters and Confederates, I don't know what else to call them, in the South here. Let's watch.
I do not like political correctness.
Political correctness?
Did you vote today?
Yes, I voted today.
Who'd you vote for?
Trump.
Why are you supporting Trump?
Because he's the one that's going to save our country, turn things around.
Save our country from what?
From terrorism, closing the borders.
The number one thing he speaks to me is the issue that he introduced, and that is sealing the borders of our country.
Let's say Donald Trump gets elected, he's in office for 4 years. If he don't do anything but close the border with Mexico, that will increase the level of security in the United States tremendously. If we don't get control of our borders, we're going to have domestic civil war in this country. We're going to have terrorism, people blowing up buses and things like that and killing people.
Supposedly, Donald Trump had said the flag needs to be put in a museum. But you show me a politician that has not said that.
They exploited and manipulated a preconceived plan of ethnic cleansing and political repression against us that have been brewing for years.
So they're trying to ethnically cleanse white people?
Well, sure they are. Won't you wake up?
There's an effort to ethnically cleanse white people?
Oh, yes, certainly there is.
Well, give me examples.
Well, there are two bills now in the legislature to demolish or remove every Confederate monument on the State House grounds.
So that's a threat to you being alive?
That's a threat to the whole culture.
I'm asking about Donald Trump. Do you think he is going to put a stop to what you say is white ethnic cleansing?
Listen to Hillary and Bernie.
I'm listening. Talk to me.
Well, what is she saying? Systemic racism. Systemic racism.
You don't think there's systemic racism in America?
Well, if there is, it's usually against all the college professors who are white conservatives who have been fired from their jobs.
You don't think he is generalizing when he says Mexican immigrants are rapists, drug lords? He's when he says we need a temporary ban on Muslims.
He said, I imagine you got some good people coming over here. He said, but the government was sending the rapists and the drug dealers over here.
All you got to do is look around, you look at the news and see the threat. And it's that simple. But
From Mexico?
everywhere, all the borders need to be protected.
Do you agree with Donald Trump that President Obama was not born in America?
I don't know where he was born. He could have been born in Kenya. He could have been born in Indonesia, Hawaii. Supposedly the hospital on the birth certificate doesn't exist, or it wasn't open then. The purpose of today is the commemoration of the burning of Columbia, February the 17th, 1865.
Do you understand why this flag is offensive to African Americans?
Well, they really don't know the history.
Can you see this is very painful and offensive to African Americans?
I really don't see that. I think that they've been told that. And
Been told that by who?
by the mass media. I think they've been virtually brainwashed, and the NAACP.
What am I missing? Because you say this doesn't stand for slavery and this doesn't stand for oppressing black people.
When I read in history, it was about the North, you know, the federal government coming in and telling people in the South what they should and shouldn't do, and the South succeeded.
South Carolina seceded because they opposed the election of Lincoln.
We can't let those people who've come from a war-racked country, 5 years of civil war, we don't know what's in their heads. I mean, they've seen people shot down in the street and murdered and everything else. They're prime candidates to get here and become criminals. When you say that a crime against a homosexual person also should have hate crimes added to it, but a crime against a heterosexual, they only prosecute you for the crime, you've already elevated the homosexual person above the heterosexual person.
Because they're a minority that was persecuted specifically for that reason.
Yeah, but we live in a democracy. Everybody's supposed to be the same. Sorry. Everybody's supposed to be equal. What you're trying to say is that LGBT people and homosexuals and whatnot ought to be more.
He knows what needs to be done.
What needs to be done?
Well, like he said, make America great again. In Dixieland, I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Oh, way. Oh, way.
That was unbelievable. And that's great for people to see, because a lot of people probably naively think that, hey, you know, I'm sure to one extent or another, people throughout the country are exactly like I am in my own little bubble. If you happen to be a progressive living in a state that's relatively liberal. But that's not the case. I mean, there are true conservatives in the world. There are true fundamentalists in the world. There are true neo-Confederates, as you're seeing right here, white nationalists, if you will. Get a little taste of it. It's a sad thing to witness, isn't it? Now, there's so many things to respond to there. I mean, first of all, one of the guys said, you know, problem is federal government told the South what to do, so they seceded. You're missing some details there, bro. Why did the North want to tell the South what to do? Because the South was like, all right, we're going to continue to own black people, and we're going to oppress them. But notice the mind, the victimization complex of these kinds of people. What did they say? No, it was the federal government telling us what to do. No, but wait. They were only telling you what to do because you were telling black people what to do. You were oppressing black people. And what you're saying is, don't oppress me. Don't take away my rights to oppress black people. Don't take away my right to own a slave. But that's not a right. That's not a right. They think if you stop them from oppressing people, then they're oppressed. No, that's not. That's not oppression. Oppression is what you're doing to the blacks. The North was righting the wrong and trying to fix the situation. But they don't view it like that, man. They flip it. When you have a victim narrative, you just flip everything to you being the victim. And it's always hilarious because it's the right that always accuses the left of having the victim complex. Listen to this. They're like, we were victims when we owned the slaves, and the North tried to stop us from owning slaves. Unbelievable. Then he says, well, blacks don't know the history of the Confederate flag. Oh, right, that's the problem. They're just ignorant. No, I do believe you're the one who's ignorant, because if you're trying to pretend like that's not tied to white supremacy, you're just wrong. You're just wrong. Now, there were multiple versions of the Confederate flag, and this isn't the exact one that was used back in the day when there was slavery, but the whole purpose of the modern day Confederate flag and the way that one looks, that was directly tied to being pro-segregation. So when the civil rights movement was happening, this flag was used as a fuck you to the civil rights movement and to, hey, know your role, get in your place, Blackie. What are you doing over here? So this signifies that we're against desegregation. That's what that flag is about. And like, what do you mean, offensive? It's not offensive. They're just ignorant on the history. It means culture and history. Okay, but what specifically? Those are broad terms, right? That's vague. Culture, history. What about culture and history? It means you were racist pricks. That's what it is. There's no debate about that. There's no rational debate about that. That's the reality of it. Then we get scapegoating 101. Now, in essence, this is the oldest trick in the book, where you have the rich somehow get middle-class whites and poor whites to blame minorities for all their problems. Now, again, that's a trick, man. It's not the minorities that are the cause of your problems, your financial issues, your woes. We know what the cause of that is. It's the corruption in Washington. It's the fact that the multinational corporations and the billionaires own the government, and they've rigged the rules in their favor. And the government no longer represents the American people across the board, north, south, anywhere. Conservative, liberal, everybody. So you have the rich rigging the system in their favor, and then to try to divert attention away from them, who actually fucked up the system and who rigged it in their favor and screw over the regular people, they say, oh, it's our fault, it's not our fault, we're just successful. You don't hate success, do you? Are you waging a war on success? Don't do that. So who do you blame? I don't know, immigrants, black people, minorities, Muslims, anybody but me. Hey, blame those goddamn undocumented immigrants who come in here and take your great job. Things that the evidence does not bear out in any way, shape, or form. When Alabama tried to ship out illegal immigrants, and they did, it was like a few weeks later that everybody was like, okay, you got to bring them back because we're not filling these jobs, and they did a much better job. So it's just not true that the immigrants and minorities are the source of your problems. You've been duped. You fell for it. The rich blame them, so you followed it, and you were like, okay, yeah, I'll blame them. But again, the problem is the donor class capturing the government. And finally, they really said they're trying to ethnically cleanse white people. That's what's happening in America right now. Do you not know what those terms mean? He's like, yeah, they're trying to ethnically cleanse us. That's why they're trying to take the Confederate flag down from state houses. All right, that's not ethnically cleansing. That's the fundamental equivalent of taking down the Nazi flag in Germany. Like, okay, this represents something bad. We're going to take this one down. The Confederate flag, they're like, no, even though that represents slavery and oppression and white supremacy, if you take it down, you're, again, victimizing us. You're oppressing us. No, the flag represents oppression of black people. What are you talking about? Taking that down is not ethnically cleansing anything, taking that down as being intelligent. So it's unbelievable. Ethnically cleansing white people. Dude, you know, I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but I think it's roughly 65% of the U.S. population is white. And these guys are like, oh, we're under attack, man, even though we're the majority and we've had the power structure for the longest time in the country, but we're under attack. But look, I honestly, even though I'm belittling it a little bit here, I don't want to do that because I think that these are people who, they have had it rough. They don't have the same economic opportunities as many people do. And they've lived kind of sad lives of desperation. And when they're in that position, they're looking for somebody to blame. And they just scapegoat all the wrong people. When the reality is, if you diagnose the situation accurately, you would blame the federal government, you would blame the corruption, you would blame Wall Street, you would blame the people that actually fucked up the system and rigged it in their favor as you got fucked over. So the funny thing is, I think these guys would think a lot differently if we had the equivalent of Bernie Sanders rule their entire lifetimes, or FDR rule their entire lifetimes. That's not to say there'd be no racists and no bigots, but typically if you give people an economic opportunity, they can actually use their attention and their focus to get ahead since they have a shot, and they're less likely to wallow in their misery and then start scapegoating people and turn to massive racists. So again, I'm not saying, hey, if we had social democracy from the jump, that there would be no racists in the U.S., and there'd be no crazy neo-Confederates. Of course there would be. But would there be less racist neo-Confederates, people who are desperate and they scapegoat others? Absolutely, man. And this is very similar to many arguments that people have made about, you know, war-torn regions in the Middle East, how there's been this increase in Islamic extremism. Sure, a lot of that is the fault of the ideology. Just like here, these neo-Confederates, you partially blamed the ideology. But also the reality is, if these people were growing up in stable states that gave them an opportunity, well, and they had economic well-being, well, there would just be fewer crazy religious nut jobs or far-right political activists. There would just be fewer of them, and that's a situation that's better for everybody.